Joining us is a gentleman who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a special good evening to General Secretary of the NATUC, Michael Annisette, the National Trade Union Center. Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening to you and the listening public. And may I extend my blessings and also from the most divine master, universal master, and ancestors to Trinidad and Tobago as we prepare for that big day tomorrow.
Yes. Now, in April of 2022, the National Trade Union Center, Trinidad and Tobago, held a press conference at the NUGFW Hall, where representatives of NATUC stood alongside parents and 5 affected young people aged 17 to 23 who reported severe adverse effects after taking the COVID-19 vaccine. And at that time, NATUC publicly called on the Minister of Health and the Chief Medical Officer to have a heart and to listen to the voices of the injured and their families. And if you fast forward to April 16th of 2025, a pre-action protocol letter has now been issued to the Attorney General and the North Central Regional Health Authority by attorneys Alvin Ramroop, Kingsley Walsby, and Stephanie Rajkumar of Kingsley Walsby and Associates. This legal action is being taken on behalf of the widower of the late Alicia Kana Sibaran, who bravely appeared at the 2022 press conference to share her story. A lot of this talk seems to be something that is deemed to be taboo. You can't mention it, you can't talk about it. I want to first of all say hats off to you and your team for taking this brave step, because many of us, whether we want to admit it or not, we know someone who knows someone that has been affected, there has been adverse effects. I mean, I can tell you there are some 16 and 18-year-old young men who have had pacemakers inserted. And there are people who are still suffering from respiratory problems and other, of course, symptoms. I mean, what are we looking at here, when we look at this lawsuit? Because many people are saying, listen, this thing is going to be global, it's going to have some serious effects. Why did NATUC decide that they had to take this stand once and for all with those people who have been affected?
All right, let me first say that what you are saying is correct. The statement that you make, it has confirmed the research that we have done in our own little way in the context of so many people being affected adversely by taking the vaccine. Right, that is the first point that I want to make. The second point that I want to make, which is disturbing to me and the National Trade Union Center and anybody who loves justice, is that the Chief Medical Officer and other members of his team were given, I can't remember the name of the medal, but a medal, they were awarded a medal for the conduct and how they went about doing their business during the COVID-19. And it is disturbing to me because from where we sit and where I sit, the issue of truth is not what I will want to call neutral. Truth is not something that you have to edit to reflect your thought process and how you want the general public to look at things. All right, and that has been the story in COVID-19 by this government. Having said that, the issue of going legal, we must support it, and we will continue to support the whole issue of COVID-19 given the adverse effects that I call it the jab. That was my word. And I was called, as you remember, by the Prime Minister then, a social media doctor. But what we were saying within the trade union movement, along with other like-minded persons, doctors, etc., is that you cannot force someone to take an injection for them to go to work or for them to work, and do not accept liability for forcing someone to take an injection. And I am hoping that with this court case, a lot of information when they come out in the public domain where a lot of issues are going to be made clear, because a lot of issues have been swept under the carpet. And as you rightly say, as I speak in 2025, there are still many people who are affected by the injection that they were forced to take, either to keep their work or to go to work. All right, private companies mandated that they must take it without accepting any kind of liability. And as you rightly say, we see what would have happened to this young lady, which is rather unfortunate. And she was one of the persons who took the injection that was part of the press conference that we were forced to have under the ban of the National Trade Union Center, because there was denial from the minister and from the chief medical officer and his team within the context of what was really happening and how people were being affected adversely by this injection. So I say hats off to the lawyers, and hats off to everybody who is part of this, of which NATUC is part of, because the truth must be told.
Well, let me also say that there are other CARICOM countries that are looking on to see how this thing is going to unfold, because there are other areas among the CARICOM region that have the similar situations. The thing about it is that medical documentation submitted with the claim confirms that Alicia was in good health with no known illnesses or medical complaints prior to receiving the COVID-19 shot. Now that's very important for people to understand. So, for those who wait and say, well, there's no connection, there's nothing there to link the shot to what transpired, and of course, with the end result being her death. When this is now in the public domain, I mean, it's moving forward. What are some of the things that you're hearing? Because, we're hearing people say now, the company, of course, that manufactured and made this vaccine that you're talking about is a global company. It doesn't want to admit to any wrongdoings, of course. It doesn't believe that its product is a liability. You're taking on quite a big task here. What do you expect the end results to be?
All right, let me say, when people who are standing up for justice stay silent, they are complicit in all the wrongs that is happening. And as you rightly said, that this issue is a global issue, because I have no doubt in my mind that the shutting down of the global economy is the first time that happened in the world, and we must understand that. That was, in my humble view, that is my analysis, which I'm subject to, was an attempt to reshape the global economy. But they bounced their head. Why? Because there were people who was resisting taking the vaccine. And I want you to remember Trinidad and Tobago. The PNM government came back into power riding the wave that they were best suited to handle COVID-19, because the other side had no clue in the context of what they are doing. And I think we must never forget that, because if you look at where we were ranked in terms of death per capita, we were ahead of the curve. And therefore, something radically went wrong with our system. And I think it is absolutely necessary that plays out in the courthouse, in the public court opinions, so that we must never make that kind of mistake again in Trinidad and Tobago. And I am hoping that we will have a medical bill of health that will protect the citizenry if and when you are forced or asked due to the health rules and regulations to take a vaccine. Because workers and human being lives, in my humble view, must give priority over a vaccine. Although there's a school of thought that I'm no, if I'm dying, save the many, that is not an issue. I don't share that particular view because we are all human beings and lives must be respected. And if you tell somebody that you have to take the vaccine, the government must accept liability for whatever happens for forcing anyone to take the vaccine, be it under the healthcare, be it under WHO, be it under PAHU, because you know they are coming up with new measures to pause this question of vaccination.
Well, and that was my next question, because the pre-action protocol letter argues that the state created a system of cohesion in Trinidad and Tobago, of course, to compel the COVID-19 vaccination, circumventing informed consent, meaning, of course, there was no room for citizens to say, listen, our rights and what have you. But what do you say to people who weigh in on this and say, listen, in the heights of a pandemic, all of that has to be circumvented. All of that has to be sidelined because the priority here is to save lives.
All right, let me answer this from a historical narrative and anticipate. This is not the first time that we had vaccinations, It's not the first time. But this is the first time that a vaccination evolved within a 6 months period. 1, 2, the pharmaceutical companies who made billions of dollars, they were exempted from any form of liability as a consequence of making that vaccines, the various vaccines. And that is something that we have to pay attention to. Who gives WHO or PAHO the rights to make those kinds of decisions on behalf of the global citizenry? And we're talking here about democracy. My rights must be respected as a human being because a life is critical. One life is one life too much. And in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know if the population was aware. All right, but we had over 2,000 deaths over the period in Trinidad and Tobago. But more importantly, if you look at some of the studies that was done for COVID-19 mortality paradox, where they did studies with United States versus Africa, you would have found out that the African nations who they thought would have had an uptick more than anybody in the context of vaccination did not have it. Why? Because they use medicine, they use medication that they were aware of, which helped them, but the EU and Dr. Ponchi and these people and them insisted that we had to use those vaccinations, but there were other medications that you could have used that was working pretty well against vaccines, against the pandemic rather. And those are issues you cannot deny as citizens. Those are facts. So those who want to, dabble in that kind of concept, it is rather unfortunate that you have people thinking that way when lives are important. And let me end by saying, with the first point that I was making, the vaccination that we had before went through rigorous tests. It went through rigorous tests. I took vaccines for malaria and all these kinds of things years ago, chicken pox when we were children. But how long did that vaccination took? What was the kind of means test that was done before it was administered to the population? We did not see that in COVID-19. Right, with this pandemic, the global world was shut down by who and why it was shut down. And I want people to understand. Go and see the statistics in Norway. Norway did not shut down their schools. Norway put a protocol in place, and Norway was the best run and least affected European countries because of the system that they put in place. And those are fundamental questions that we have to ask. Why it is that this government did not do rather the due diligence and the due test to ensure that the safety and the lives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago becomes more important than just following the pharmaceutical industry, who was making profits and who was in league with certain people to make profits. But the safety and the question of liability went through the window to protect these pharmaceutical
And
companies.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. A lot of it was done basically in secrecy. I mean, we're still talking, we're still hearing about non-disclosure agreements. So there was definitely a lack of transparency. You didn't have a choice as to perhaps which one, based on your own personal research, would have been the best vaccine. And all of these things were not forthcoming at that time. And again, it was basically about selling to the people that this is a life-saving procedure. You have to take it, otherwise you wouldn't be able to work, you wouldn't be able to function, you wouldn't be able to earn a dollar and what have you. But in all of go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you are hitting the nail on the proverbial head. And you see, we need to begin to start to think in our society. We need, God give us an innate ability to think. It is within us, because I am because you are. And he made us in his own image and likeness. For those who talk about Christianity, I talk about African spirituality. But if you want to talk about Christianity, he made us in his own image and likeness. And then therefore, that should tell you something about human beings. And it's rather unfortunate that this has happened. And the government is aware, because I made the statement when we had the press conference, and I called on the government and the minister to have a heart, because we had young people from 17 years to 23 years sitting in front of us who were healthy and who were forced to take the vaccine. And then don't ever forget that we had what you call a position in Trinidad, where I call it a COVID-19 apartheid passport, in order for you to go to certain places. All right? And then if the employer or the business place didn't insist, ensure that the person who came into his business establishment was unvaccinated, he could have been charged 50,000. And I'm also the patron $5,000. This government passed that law, and everybody failed to forget that when that law was passed, it was the zonal law. All right? Okay?
And you're right. And people
what happened?
I agree with you.
There was an immediate uptick in the question of the spread of COVID-19, and there were questions that was being asked, because they said, if you took the vaccination, you cannot spread COVID, which has been proven internationally by medical research. This is not Michael and Annisette speaking, that was one of the biggest lies perpetrated against the population of Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean. Because I will put on the Caribbean at now. Because we were following a narrative coming from WHO, and all these other institutions who were in league with big pharmaceutical industries.
And I think, Mr. Annie said that's what we saw. We saw Big Pharma having quite a field day with this. Now you have, on the eve of an election, you have the opposition leader making it quite clear that once she gets into office, there will be a commission of inquiry into all that took place. And I think that's only fair, because many people, you hear the stories, they dropped off their family members because we were told that we couldn't come in. We could only drop off those who, of course, were affected by the virus. and
Yeah.
then later on to get a phone call, if you were lucky, to get a phone call to say, well, your uncle or your nephew or your aunt or your mother unfortunately did not make it. If you were lucky, you were going to get that
Lucky.
call. If not, you had to make calls. I know a family that I was helping trying to make calls to find out, and finally I had to reach somebody who was of a certain status in the health authority to just to hear that on a list that that person is no longer among the living. And then you hear reports about people who were in those rooms where they were treating those COVID patients that may not have had much training, didn't have an understanding of using the equipment. I mean, so much things went bad. What say you about this commission of inquiry? Because I personally would like to know.
No, listen, if I'm supported, the question of going to the court to bring justice to the family of this young lady, Alicia Siberan Francis. All that I am saying requires an investigation. Because from a trade union working class perspective and from a truth perspective, right, one must understand what went wrong, where we went wrong, so that we would not make that mistake and perpetrate that lie of coercion without liability against the population of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean region, and may I say globally. And just for the records, you can Google it. Trinidad and Tobago COVID death rate of approximately 2,876 deaths per million people is notably higher than the global average and places it amongst countries with elevated mortality rates. That's a fact. It is not Michael Annisette is saying that, and then therefore there is a moral, legal, spiritual, Christian, whatever you want to call it, Buddha, whatever you want to call it, responsibility to get to the bottom of this in a democratic way and in an independent way, so that the evidence and the truth will come out. Because, as I say, I know people who took the vaccine, they cannot even go in a gas station or pass by KFC because the scent of the gas and the KFC chicken and the smell affect them and get them nausea. They never used to suffer that. Those are people who were 30 years, 35, 40 years, and when they took the vaccine, that started to happen. That cannot be a coincidence, and nobody can make me believe
I agree.
that is a coincidence. Those
No,
are,
I
know people who had blood clots, right? Who when I'm native, calling them.
That's right.
The flow was so excessive, and when they go to doctor wasn't recording that for whatever reason.
Someone has to give us the answers. You're right. You have women whose cycles have definitely been off track since this entire episode. Again, as I tell you, I know young men, young people who had to be, pacemakers had to be inserted.
Yeah, but look at how much healthy athletes in America who dropped down.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, those are facts. We were told, right, and this government play into the hands of the bigger body by saying, and I remember the statement by the government because of technological advancement, we are able within 6 months, you know, to get a vaccine. And I ask the question, well, if that is so good, and we have that kind of technology, why can't we find a cure for cancer within 6 months? Why can't we find a cure for diabetes within the 6 months period? But and I want the population to remember that this government tried to force public servants, right, that if you do not go and take your vaccine, you will be, what's the word that was used? For long, which is an American term to say that you will be laid off. for
That's
a
right.
period of time. That's a fact.
That's
And the
right.
trade union movement had to stand up against it because they were telling you to go and take the vaccine, but the population who was coming to interface with you, there was no mechanism to see whether or not they took the vaccine. I mean, what kind of madness and insensibility and insensitivity is that?
Mr. Annisette, I think I speak for all right-thinking citizens. We really and truly need to get to the bottom of this. We need to have a commission of inquiry. There are too many reports, too many stories out there that you can hear from people who have had some very adverse effects to what took place and what transpired. Young people, middle-aged people, women, and of course the entire cycle. There's been reports of hair loss. You name it, all of
Yes,
these
yes,
things.
yes,
Here,
yes, yeah.
those
Oh
people
my
who have
God.
become visually impaired, hearing it, all of these things. And I think it's only fair that we get to the bottom of this because no one protected us. No one, we had family
No
members
one,
who were locked
no one.
out. They were locked out of the country. They couldn't come in.
That was the last point that I was going to make. Trinidad and Tobago got a bad report again as, as it relates to that lockout and ethical analysis of Trinidad and Tobago COVID-19 border closure by El Budi Narayan Singh. And I have the report in front of me, and the report is a telling indictment against this government by how they went about treating our citizens.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for taking
All
time
right,
out
and
this evening. Go ahead, quickly.
if I may quickly, I am hoping that we'll be able to have a conversation because there's this misrepresentation over the 12% that this government refused to give dock workers when we sign a legitimate collective agreement for 12% with
Yeah,
Tigers.
but you have those who are sneaking off to take 4 and
No.
5%.
Well, hello, I am not those. Siemens Union, and I'm making a public statement that the
Go
government
ahead.
made the biggest mistake, right, to challenge and to pick a fight with Siemens Union, and they will pay the ultimate price. Because you cannot tell me that our minister at the time, Cadiz, and his permanent secretary and other members signed a legitimate agreement, and you said that we were supposed to go to CPO, but the same government comes now, and I'm signed with the estate police and the senior management of the Port Authority without no CPO and give them increases, but you do not want to give dock workers their legitimate increase, and we will continue to fight that war. All right, and then we are hoping that we wouldn't have to continue to fight such a war after the 28th of April.
And let me ask you, all of these affected workers that you represent, those who feel that they've been neglected and disrespected by the current administration, are they going to be out in their numbers to vote tomorrow?
Well, I hope that good sense will prevail because the only way that truth is going to prevail and honesty and dignity and respect is when each individual stand up for what is right. Let me repeat it. That is the only way. You cannot hide. This has nothing to do with ethnicity, race, or political party for dock workers. This has to do with a deliberate attempt by this government to prevent our legitimate agreement for dock workers going back since 2015. But they run quick in an election period to even pay 50% of the back pay to the senior management staff because they say they want to do that before elections. I mean, and then you don't care about dock workers who are the movers and the heartbeat of the operations in the port. Come on, you want to give us 002 when we negotiated at 12%? Come on. So I am making a call to dock workers and to all those who cherish the right to collective bargaining because we didn't have collective bargaining. The agreements was executed in Parliament, which is a violation of the Convention governing collective bargaining,
That's true.
which this government signed for. This proposals was made on political platforms. That is not negotiation, it's a violation of the tripartitism that this government signed to, and people must pay attention. And let me make it clear, when I'm given the opportunity, and I hope you invite me back, I will show them that there's a new economic model that speaks to job-led growth and wage-led growth. And those countries that follow that came out of the economic crisis faster than those who follow. And then finally, I want them, just let me make this point quickly. I want them to take a look at Dubai when they started to drill oil. I want them to take a look at Trinidad because we started in 1850 something, and then we started to do the drilling in 1917. Look at where Dubai is in terms of an economy and a country, right? As opposed to Trinidad and Tobago, who was drilling oil long before Dubai. Trinidad and Tobago, think. That is all I have to say.
Thank you
for this opportunity.
I
do appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Yep. And there you have it, folks. That was
all right, and blessings again, and may our ancestors and the universal divine master guide us and protect us in all that.
And all I'm asking is that when we finish, please start making the calls to all of those people, because you made it quite clear it's an insult with 0001 and all of that, when in fact it was agreed upon for 12%. Please ensure that they are all ready to head to the polls tomorrow.
Yeah, well, there's a few listening, right? There's a few listening, and then we have been having our discussions. I've been putting the facts as a president and as a citizen and as someone who believes in the truth and democracy. I've been putting the facts on the table, and I've asked them wait, because there's a saying we don't have no money to pay it because that is baloney, right? That is because the government do not see workers being able to maintain their living standard, to be able to maintain their purchasing power, because the workers still living on 2014 salaries, and the minister had the gumption to go and say he wish SWW2 would have signed that agreement 002. And I made it clear to the government that we're not prepared to sign that, given the negotiations and the agreement that was signed between the Port Authority and Siemens Union, which is a legitimate agreement. They could say what they want, because my recognition and certification is with the Port Authority and not the CPO, and it was demonstrated when the estate police and the senior management went this week and signed an agreement not through the CPO. I will say no more on that point. Who have sense? And who have eyes, let them see, and who have ears, let them hear.
Thank you so much again, Mr.
Okay, brother.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah.